Okay. I'm on? All right, so I want to get us started here tonight. I'm Carl Dix, a longtime revolutionary. I'm a follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, and I'm on the staff here at Revolution Books. I want to welcome everybody to tonight's program, which is an Author Plus event on this book, Rikers, an Oral History. I'll explain what the plus means in a second. But I want to welcome you to Revolution Books. This is the intellectual, cultural, and political center for a movement for an actual revolution. I mean, you can look around and you'll see that there are books about the world, and if you look closely into it, we have books for a new world. At the heart of our mission of bringing that new world into being is the work of the revolutionary leader that I follow, Bob Avakian. His works are on the table up in front, also over there. You may have gotten some in your packet or the information that was put out on the table. We can talk about that in a minute. This is the kind of store that is urgently needed right now. Because when you look at what's happening around the world, there is an urgent need for a totally different and far better society for people to live in. I could tick off the things, threat of world war and nuclear war, the destruction of the environment, the attacks on the rights of women, LGBTQ people, attacks on voting rights, stuff that we were sure we had won back when I was young are being taken away. And all of that is flowing from this system and how it works, and that's why we're committed to bringing forward a movement for an actual revolution. The other thing I want to say about Revolution Books is that it only exists because of the support of people like you. So I see some faces that maybe are new to the store. I see some others that I've seen around before. Those of you who are new should make this a place that you come back to regularly. Come back, browse around, get books, but also come back for the events that happen here. We need this kind of store, and this store needs your involvement and your support. And if you want to get more involved, one of the ways you could get involved in the movement for a real revolution is by getting involved in Revolution Books, working with the bookstore here. There are a couple of people you could talk with about that. Jane down here in front. And then there's some people who must be off in the back because I don't see them. Oh, actually, one's behind the camera. There's Connie over there, Sue in the back. Briefly, I want to bring out one important way that you can get involved by contributing. We have a $2,000 match challenge that was inspired by a program we did a month and a half ago on, I'm forgetting the title of it. Industrialization of Sexual Exploitation. And we really got into that question and all of the stuff around it. Should this be seen as sex work, or is this oppression? All of that got aired in that program. And a health care professional, maybe a mental health care professional, was so inspired by that she said, if you can raise $2,000, I'll match it. So be part of helping us match this challenge. And like I said, there are people here you could talk about. All right, and I did introduce myself. I sometimes forget that. That's the only thing. All right, so now we're to our event. Rikers and Oral History. We have with us the co-authors of it, Graham Rayman and Reuven Blau. We also have one of the people who helped to provide the oral history, Edward Rosario. That's our panel for tonight. And we are excited about doing this program. We're excited about doing this program because of the book. I mean, this is a book that lays bare the horrors that people held in Rikers are subjected to, the dehumanization that they face on a daily basis. I think my thing is going in and out.
Why don't you closer?
All right, is this on? This is on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we'll share this one. The dehumanization that they face on a daily basis, the official violence that the guards routinely and casually inflict upon them, and the way in which people are set up against each other and carry out violence on each other. All of this goes down. On top of the murderous conditions that people face there. And when I say murderous, I am not hyping it. 17 people died in Rikers last year. The year before that, I think it was, I think 2019 was the high one.
It was 19 last year and 16 the year before.
Okay. They're the ones who did the book. They know. But the sentences that people got in Rikers did not include death. And frankly, most of the people in Rikers have no sentence because they haven't been tried yet. And what that says is that this is a modern-day debtor's prison because the people in there don't have the money to pay the bail that the court has set. This is something, and there's much more that this book gets into. This is stuff that people need to know. Additionally, look, we here at Revolution Books see Rikers as a concentration, a hellhole and a concentration of the future that this system has for far too many people in this society, especially far too many black youth and other oppressed youth. This, plus the racially targeted police terror that comes down, is a spearhead of a genocidal attack on sections of oppressed youth. These things by themselves would be reason enough to want to make a revolution, and they're far from the only problems in this society. People need to learn about these horrors and that are being enforced on human beings, and they need to be challenged to dig into why they're happening and what can be done to end them. And I want to be part of that process with people, and I will be bringing forward what I see as the only way to end them, and that is through a real revolution, one that gets rid of this system and its repressive institutions and replaces it with a totally different and far better system that has institutions that don't hold people down, but in fact back them up and unleash them to transform the relations of exploitation and oppression from today and to help transform society and themselves in the process. So that's what I wanted to say to open this up. I believe I introduced you all too, right? Introductions I miss sometimes. I just don't want people not to know who they're hearing from. So I'm going to start this out by asking a question. And that question is, why did you all decide to do this book? And it's a two-parter. And why did you decide to do it in the way that you did?
Well, we decided to do the book because Rikers is a place that it's almost a place that it is a place that nobody goes to unless you have a specific reason to go there. And so people have all these ideas in their heads. If they think about it at all, they have all these ideas in their heads about what it is. and all that. And we wanted to tell the story of Rikers, tell a history of Rikers. And initially, Reuven and I talked about doing a conventional history, which would, just a regular conventional history, third-person narrator and all that. But we decided it would be much more powerful and much more effective to ground the whole thing in the voices of the people who were most affected. And that we took ourselves, in essence, it was a conscious decision for us to take ourselves out of the equation as much as we could. We interviewed everyone who would talk to us. The only people who aren't in the book are people who specifically refuse to talk to us. So, we tried to keep the other than taking out the ums and the ahs, we tried to keep everything pretty pure in terms of the translation. And so what I think comes out, and then we did more than 130 interviews. So I think what comes out is this sort of really intimate story that is told through many voices, and I think there is kind of a story arc to it if you've read the book. So that was our intent. Reuven?
Yeah, sure. First, I just want to say it's just a real honor to be on the same dais as yourself and Eddie as well, to kind of share. I know you're somebody with an incredible biography, and somebody who's obviously kind of not just talk the talk, walk the walk, and it's really just an honor to be here. And I know Eddie was incredibly helpful and courageous to kind of share his story and help us kind of back read for us as well. The question as far as why we did this, I mean, I think it also goes to who we are. Like Graham and I have covered this issue, me for about 20 years, I think Graham for longer, on a day-to-day basis, for the tabloids, and now I work for like a nonprofit called The City. And I think one of the challenges is that, you get into this feeling of like it's repetitive and people are numb to some of these stories. And, this gives just an incredible opportunity for us to bring it out in a different venue, in a different project. And one of the things that's kind of amazing to me now, seeing some of the reviews or people kind of commenting about the book, is they're talking about how it's difficult to read and it's challenging, and it makes you kind of feel like you're actually there. And it's weird a little bit for me to hear that, because for me, covering this, it's so rote. Like, this is the experience that we've heard over and over again for the last 20, 30 years. And this isn't like out of the normal. Like this is what people are going through. I mean, people are brought onto this island where it's incredibly difficult for people to visit family. Many of these people, over 50%, have some type of self diagnosis of mental illness. Over, I think it's 80 or 90% are not convicted of a crime yet, as he mentioned. This isn't one case. These aren't outliers. This is the experience that we're going through right now. Like, this is not some out of the line or outside the box experience. And and doing this book was sort of our way of highlighting that and bringing it out to the attention of others.
I just thought of a good example of that. Carl mentioned the deaths that we had last year in the jails, 19 last year and 16 the year before. Well, there was one case that just happened where a man went into medical distress. The call went out. There was some kind of screw up. There was a long delay. The detainees picked him up and carried him. Finally picked him up and carried him to the clinic because there was no help coming. The correction officers were there was no one on post in this particular one. There wasn't an officer. There should have been an officer on post, but there was no officer there. The officer in the bubble, which is like the little security room, did not want to come out of the bubble for reasons that are mystifying to me. So the detainees picked him up and carried him to the clinic but too much time had passed. Of course, then after he died, then everybody came, right? The exact same, then there was an investigation and then, dozens of supervisors. 2 years earlier, there was the exact same thing happened. A man who in the book we call Viejo, because that was the nickname that the people we interviewed who were in the same unit with him knew him by. They didn't know his real name. And Viejo had a terrible asthmatic attack. The same exact sequence. They picked him up as he was dying and tried to get him. In this case, no medical attention came. The officers were no help. They tried to get him to the clinic. This time they couldn't get through the doors. It was a much longer distance. There was a series of doors. So he died in their arms. Basically, they brought him back to his bed, and they made him, and finally then, of course, everybody came. Everybody came. They even had trauma counselors come after the fact. When this was an asthma attack, it could have been. So. And the person who told us that story, David Campbell, he gave me a sketch of the little memorial that they set up for him in the thing that was quite moving. But that's what we're talking about. That's what Reuven is referring to. This sort of again and again and again going through this over and over again.
Yeah, I just want to add really quickly, if I can. I mean, another example of that is just the news today, right? There was a settlement, I think it's for $53 million for illegally placing detainees in solitary confinement, which is essentially intake for multiple days on end. And I was telling Graham before just getting up here is that we've done multiple events, and it's almost like every single time we do an event, there's another news story that comes out like this. And this one is particularly interesting in that harrowing, and in that the commissioner and the correction unions have long said that we don't do solitary, right? We don't have a system that's in place where we do this to people, and it's always this sort of semantics of like what solitary is. Is it 23 hours? Is it 18 hours, 10 hours? Like, I mean, if anyone's ever been in a room like that for an extended period of time, like I don't think they're going to argue that that's not solitary. And there's a bill right now in the city council that's been banging around for I think 3-4 years now, to ban this, and actually the nation is looking at this. I talked to some activists outside of New York, and they're actually waiting for New York to sort of pass this ban on solitary, and they really want New York to get it right. But it's been sitting around. Like the prior city council commissioner had spoken out in support of it, and he's it never went anywhere when he was there, Corey Johnson, and now the current speaker has spoken out very loudly about closing Rikers, but has really not taken much of a position on this legislation as well.
Okay, that's you guys. We got one over there. Okay, there are a few places I want to go, but before I do that, I'm just thinking, I did a little bit of time myself a while ago. I did 2 years in Leavenworth Military Penitentiary for the crime of refusing to go to Vietnam. One of those years, and I would do it again, because it was a necessary step to take. It was that or become part of a genocidal war and maybe become a mindless killer for this system. Because some of my friends had gone over. Many of them didn't come back at all, and some of them came back and they had left their motherfucking minds over in Vietnam somewhere. I mean, one real sweet guy, sweet kid, people used to pick on him and I'd be protecting him and everything. He came back and said, they took my belt. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, they took my belt. They took my belt. Finally, I said, look, let's go downtown. I will buy you a belt so you can stop talking about they took your belt. He said, no, this one was special. It had my ears on it. And he didn't mean these ears. He meant the ears of the Vietnamese people he had killed. That's what had happened to this guy. I was like, I can't be a part of a war like that. That's why I felt I had to refuse. The one last thing I'll tell you about this is that part of the reason I'd do it again is that refusing to go to Vietnam was a crucial step to me becoming a revolutionary and a communist. And that's why I would do it again, because this is what I should be doing. And frankly, more of you all should be doing it as well. And we can talk about that later. But I was really going over here to talk to Eddie, because it hit me like I did this time, and one thing that would have really surprised me is somebody stepping up to me and saying, we want to interview you about this. So how did it hit you when these two guys came to you and said, we want to interview you? And when did they do it? Like how far were you out?
So we are recording, right? So I want to say hello to my moms. Moms, I'm okay. I made my mother cry a lot of times, and I'm hoping that for the last 30 years, I've been making her smile more than cry. Even though the family always takes a straw poll when we have a family get-together of how long it will take me to make my mother cry. But anyway, I've been 30 years removed, about 30 years removed from my last incarceration. So I left Sing Sing Correctional Facility in 1991. So it's been a pretty long time. When I left that day, Sing Sing, one of the correctional officers said, "You'll be back," and he wasn't wrong. The thing is that I've come back many times into the belly of the beast, but this time to give a message of hope and to bring programs, because I never forgot the way I was treated while I was incarcerated. I'll never forget that. And I'm still traumatized by it, even 30 years, more than 30 years removed. Whenever I hear those gates clang, my body goes into survival mode. I don't breathe right, and I don't feel right until I leave. Anyway, so it's been a long time, and I've been interviewed by many people. I've been interviewed. They did in the early 2000s, MSNBC did a documentary on some of the work that I was doing. I was trying to develop a revolutionary approach to reentry to help people who were coming out of prison to certain communities. And so I was part of that along with Darrell King, who's no longer with us, and a gentleman named Brown. So we were all formerly incarcerated. We created this reentry project. One of the things, so it's been a while, and so how I felt is sometimes I had someone from 60 Minutes a long time ago come up to me. I was on stage, and they wanted to interview me. They wanted me to be on 60 Minutes. I'm very distrustful of the traditional media, of the corporate media, because they often spin things to create, they want to do like the really sexy, violent, stuff that you often think about when you think about prisons and jails, which is not really what happens. When people ask me, how did you survive in prison, a lot of times what they're saying is, I'm short, I'm not imposing, so they're saying, how did I survive rape, which is not a funny thing, but that's how people think. And so I always describe my daily experience of being incarcerated as a daily act of humiliation. You were humiliated every day of your incarceration, whether it was 1 day or 25 years. Every day they did something to you to make you feel less than human. And that's the real experience of incarceration. And what's worse is that in order for you to survive the incarcerated experience, you have to somehow adapt to it. You have to buy into that humiliation, because you need to navigate that world. And part of being able to navigate that world is to kind of like accept that humiliation to some degree. So it's like being locked up is probably one of the worst experiences a human being can experience. It was for me. One of my concerns was I didn't know these two gentlemen, and my concerns are always, are they going to dramatize, because when I was at Rikers, there were over 20,000 people on the island. It was like overcrowded. There was violence happening every day. People were like cutting each other's faces. I mean, you need to read the book. It was horrible. It was like the worst thing in the whole world. And people kind of gravitate to that kind of violence, right? It's like when you are driving your car and there's an accident. Everybody stops to look at the accident, right? And so I was concerned a little bit that that's what might be happening. But in my conversations with both the authors, I was really impressed by, one, their willingness and their ability to listen. Like I felt that they were really listening to me, and that they really wanted to put forth a history that was that was respectful of the people who have gone through it. And I felt I made a decision somewhere down the line that I trusted these two people and that they were there and then their hearts were in the right place. And I'm glad to say that in the finished product that I wasn't wrong, that my gut instinct was right.
Okay. Thanks.
I do have to say, I'll just be honest about this. When I heard about the book, the first thing that hit me was the voices of the people who have usually been rendered voiceless in our society were going to be featured in it. And so that was, I got to read this book. And then I found out that there were also going to be jail guards, administrators, legal aid people, Ron Kuby people like that, lawyers. I didn't mind that because, like, okay, well, they're a part of this story too, and they're generally on the side of the people who had been rendered voiceless. But I did wonder about this thing with the guards, especially the administrators. I don't know whether you guys gave any thought to that, whether it was like anybody who'll talk to us, we'll interview, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a way in which we're going to bring the audience in a minute, but you know, it's that kind of minute, so it's, don't get your watch out and look for 60 seconds. But we're going to bring you in, don't worry. So I don't know what you guys' thinking was on that. That was just something that I thought about.
You want to? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because sometimes the other way around. Like, we've heard the same issue from the guards. They're like, you interview too many detainees, and then like you call them detainees. Like, well, you know, why are you calling them that? So I think as journalists, you know, we set out to give voices, you know, to the experience as a 360, right? And it's not, you know, we interviewed cooks, we interviewed clinicians as well, you know, mental health staff, you know, and I think that one of the themes that came out also in interviewing the officers was, you know, this isn't a great experience for them either, and that none of them seem to come back out saying like, you know, this was, you know, this works. So those were the voices that we wanted to include to highlight that, you know, this is a broken system, and the people involved in the system and making these decisions feel similarly. I mean, one of the stories that stood out to us was there's a person, his name is Cindy Schwartzbaum, who's somebody Graham and I have known for a while. He's the former head of the union that represents assistant deputy wardens and deputy wardens. And he told us a story about how he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's screaming, do some up. And his wife tells him, you know, this is what's happened. He's retired now. And, you know, he has these sort of nightmares about, you know, kind of ordering people, you know, in the facility to, you know, go in pairs to the side of the wall. You know, and it was a sort of a contrast to people like, I interviewed somebody, his name is Casimiro Torres, who had done time, and he told us this story about how his girlfriend called him Smiley, and he never really asked her, and at one point he got curious and he said, well, you know, why do you call me that? And she said, it's because you don't smile, like you're never smiling. You know, so, you know, we really did want to kind of get the full picture, and you know, believe it or not, that does also include, you know, officers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody we interviewed in the book, a female correctional officer named Tammy Lee, who did 30 years in North Infirmary Command, which is actually part of it is the original Rikers jail that was finished in 1932. She says in the book memorably, I never smiled because I wanted to make sure nobody thought I was playing. And you know, she grew up in Bed-Stuy in the Tompkins houses. You know, being a correction officer is a steady job with good benefits, and if you're a correction officer long enough, you know, you can raise a family on the salary, and there's you know, one of the things she told me was that, you know, growing up in NYCHA development. It's not the easiest upbringing, not the safest place in the world, and that was a choice that she could do. And and then there was another retired correction officer, Christine West. She talked about working double shifts and her schedule constantly changing on Rikers. And she missed her daughter's birthday. She missed her daughter's basketball games. She missed her daughter's graduation. She missed everything because her schedule is constantly changing on Rikers. So this is, these stories fall into the same theme, which is we wanted to humanize the people who had gone through it. And so you can't tell the story of Rikers without telling the story of the experiences of the people who work there, in addition to the people who are incarcerated there.
Okay. Let me go here, because I was struck by what Eddie had to say about humiliation on a daily basis, because that's what I remember too. But then the other thing that hit me was what you all said about the inmates carrying the people who were dying and trying to get them medical attention. You spoke of 2 cases where they failed. There may have been other cases where they actually succeeded. But it kind of raises this thing of, you're trying to deal with this humiliation, and people deal with it in different ways. I mean, some people just get real, like, I can't think of anybody but me, and it's me against the world. But then also you have people expressing a humanity, and people actually developing relationships of working together, helping each other. But then you also have things like the violence among the people there. And I wanted to, maybe I'll start with you, Eddie, and you guys can also come into it in terms of how does all that come together, and where does it come from?
That's a really great question. For me, going through that experience also elicited a kind of an epiphany about me and my life and what I wanted to do with that life. The last time I was arrested, I had been on the street for only 14 days. And by the time they caught up with me, I had a $300 a day heroin habit, and the way I was supporting myself was by ripping off drug dealers. I never carried a gun or a weapon, and I didn't care if someone killed me. Actually, someone did pull out a gun on me, and I grabbed the gun and I put it to my forehead, and I said, if you're going to shoot me, kill me, because I don't care. And it wasn't because I was big and bad or whatever. I just was at my bottom. So that day that I was last arrested was the last day I ever took a drug. It's been over 30 years. But that day I was like obliterated. Like who I felt I was destroyed by that arrest. And so I had choices I could make. One was to continue on that road and, just doubling down. And the other one was acknowledging that I didn't know how to live and I didn't know what I was doing. And I needed to be open to a different way of life. And a lot of that had to do with political awakening as well as my own personal awakening. And so what I see, you could see acts of kindness happening in the midst of that hell, along with a lot of violence. And there's kind of like a code that even in the midst of all that insanity, there's a kind of code that occurs within people who are incarcerated. And I just want to very briefly now, if I can, talk about language. I feel that the language that we use in this country to describe and talk about people who are incarcerated is stigmatizing, is dehumanizing, and it adds to the push towards mass incarceration. Words like inmate, ex-con, thug, what have you, those are all code words that are racialized and that mean a lot more than what they seem to mean. I'm not an ex-con. I'm not an inmate. I'm a human being. And so what I would, and so to talk about that, one of my mentors' name was Eddie Ellis. Eddie Ellis was a part of the Black Panther Party in New York City a long time ago. He was incarcerated for over 20 years for a crime he didn't commit. He was more like a political prisoner than anything else. He was one of my mentors. And we created a think tank that was entirely created of people who were formerly incarcerated. And these people some didn't even have high school diplomas to a housing court judge. You have people who have PhDs and what have you, the whole gamut. And we wanted to impact policy around mass incarceration. And one of the first things that we did was Eddie Ellis wrote this letter, an open letter to people in the field and to society at large to use language that identified us as human beings. That instead of saying inmate, say currently incarcerated human, formerly incarcerated person, to use humanizing language, because if you don't do that, then you're kind of contributing to this whole push to mass incarceration. So one of the conversations that I had with both Graham and Reuven was around this issue of language, and to their credit, they really took that to heart. And if you read the book, they adopted, language that's humanizing, and it's really important. And so this is one of the things that came out of incarceration. Right? In the midst of all that insanity, of all that humiliation, of that violence, of the worst that humanity can do to other humans, there were people who were like awakening politically and talking about, I'm locked up here and I'm being humiliated and degraded on a daily basis, but I'm a man, I'm a human being, I'm a woman, I'm a person, I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a husband. And so I really, to me, I have spent the last 20, 30 years trying to talk about this message of talking about people who were incarcerated as they are, as human beings. So yeah, there's this, there are those who go, I've seen some guys really go off the rails, man, and go totally animalistic. And will kill you as soon as look at you. And then you have these other spots of people who are awakening politically and talking about revolution and talking about changing the situations that we were in, that they didn't have to be this way.
I don't know if you guys want to.
I don't know if you want to get questions yet. I don't know.
No, I have more.
Okay.
I just wanted to know if you want to speak on that. Look, the thing to me is that people are put in situations where, and somebody used this way to phrase it, of they're put in a pot and the heat's turned up in the pot, and then the authorities are like the lid on that pot. And that puts you in a situation that's pushing you towards some not pretty things. But then at the same time, there is potential to take things somewhere else. And let's see if I can find this. Well, I won't be able to find it. I thought I had marked it, but I didn't mark it. There is a way in which that potential needs to be expressed. And it's not just, the thing I was trying to find is, Eddie said something in one of his interviews about the relationship between being in prison and growing up in an oppressed community outside the prison. And it's kind of like you're kind of being prepared to go into prison by the conditions that you have to deal with in the projects. And then when you come out, you're not really free. And the point is, there is potential among the people in those situations in society, whether they're in the prison or outside of it, to actually be a part of something else. And as a revolutionary, I feel like we've got responsibility to challenge people to become that, to get that we've been put in this situation by something not of our choosing and not under our power, but we can get out of it, and to give people a way to get out of it and to challenge them to do that, which is something that we in Revolution Books are part of doing here. We're working to put Revolution on the map this year, and we have ways to do that. We can talk more about that afterward, but I thought about that when I thought about what Eddie had said, and I wanted to get his take on this. Two more things I want to raise before I open it up to the audience. One has to do with this thing of, to get more at the nature of Rikers. This is something you touched on this, Graham, I believe. I think it was Graham. Most of the people in Rikers ain't been convicted of nothing.
Right.
Okay, but they're in Rikers, and everything that means. I think in your book, maybe somewhere else, that something like 1/3 to 40% of people have mental health diagnoses.
Yeah,
correct.
You could talk about the health care in general, and this thing about, to get any medical attention, you have to be escorted to do that. And a lot can stand in the way of getting your escort. No, so you can be sick, but if the guard ain't there or ain't willing to escort you to the medical treatment, then it don't matter whether you're sick. This is part of what people have to deal with. And it's like, this is part of your sentence. Even though you haven't been convicted of anything, you have been sentenced to this kind of life. And this is one thing that this book brings out in quite a bit of detail from the many interviews with people who had to put up with this daily. And I believe this is part of the daily humiliation that you were talking about. So let me pose that. And then the one other question I want to bring up is the closed Rikers thing.
I just wanted to add to what you said about the sort of the architecture. We interviewed Fat Joe, who's a hip hop artist, and he said the architecture is the same between the housing developments, the public schools, and Rikers. So he said when you get to Rikers, there's a familiarity. He grew up in the South Bronx. He never did time on Rikers, but he had many friends who did. So he felt, and if you've ever been to Far Rockaway, there are some housing developments that have gates on the exterior. They have exterior hallways, and people, for some reason, they designed them in a way that made it easier to jump off or get thrown off. So they had to put. And they look like the buildings are caged. Have been caged in as a result, and I just thought that was a really striking way. So what that brings is an expectation, which is what Eddie was getting towards. Is like there's a familiarity and there's an expectation and there's an assumption about who you are and how you're going to behave, and that's it's all like built into the whole thing, and so it's. That really came out, and like it reduces everyone. Like we interviewed Ronnie Drayton, who grew up in Queens and was quite a famous guitar player, played all over the world with Parliament Funkadelic and all these bands. His son was arrested for being an accessory to a murder and was in Rikers from the age of 19 to 24 pre-trial. So Ronnie was on tour with like famous acts playing 10,000-seat venues, and then he would fly home and see his son. And so he goes from performing in front of this huge crowd to being completely reduced to just another, guy going through the security and getting hassled by the officers. And to the point, and he tells this long story, which is really powerful. I can't hope to reproduce it now, but you have to read it, about just the act of getting into a van, going across to Rikers, going through the security, being sent through the metal detector over and over again, and how he's treated with such enormous disrespect. And what happens is that sticks with people, and they go and they think about that on the outside, and they go, and it's one of the reasons why Rikers has just such a terrible reputation, because of the way people are dehumanized. He's just going to visit his son. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, you were talking about the medical part of this, and I mean, it's just one of those other things, part of the Rikers experience that just baked into the horror of it all. And the way it works, just a basic outline is you're called in. If you want to go to the doctor, you kind of put your name on a list, and then what they do is they'll call you out later, and a lot of times you won't be there when they call you, or you won't hear that they call you for the appointment. And the lawyers were starting to see that there were thousands upon thousands of these medical visits that were going missed. So more recently, they actually, because these reports were coming out monthly highlighting how this was happening, they essentially moved the goalposts, which is they kind of changed how they keep the statistic. So, now suddenly, like, everything's Shangri-La and that there isn't an issue. But they have kind of changed a little bit, or they're talking about changing, allowing people to walk themselves to the clinics, or they're trying to kind of ease some of that happening. But I interviewed for the book this person. His name is Matt Frey. He was a clinician there pretty recently, and he said that it was just going from like one patient to the next. They were just completely overwhelmed. And he had this great line that stuck out with me. He said it's a factory of despair.
So, when we talk about all this is all systemic, right? It's not broken. That's the way it's meant to work. So in order to have the kind of mass incarceration that we have, you have to have industries that are developed around keeping this structure, this systemic thing alive. So, you have, medical organizations that get rented out to provide medical care. And I'll let you know, you can have a bone sticking out of your leg, and they'll just prescribe an aspirin. Everything was aspirin. You go through all that to go see a doctor, and when you finally go see a healthcare provider, they give you an aspirin. This doesn't matter what your complaint is. Aspirin. So you have to, in order to have this whole thing called mass incarceration, in order to have that, you have to have all these attendant industries that go along with it, from the architects who develop the prisons to the construction companies that build the prisons to the people who provide the food. All of this it has to be operationalized. So when you look at mass incarceration, you have to look at it from that point of view. And then you have a society that is built around these industries that their major aim is to put human beings, mostly black and brown human beings, in cages. Right? And that's evil. That's how evil gets. That's why you have what happens at Rikers and at Attica and all these state prisons and city jails. I remember once, and I'll probably get, whenever you mention Nazis, they say you lose the debate. But, the Nazis were... yeah, I'm glad I'm in the right place. Hitler and his guys, they were big. They were students of U.S. histories. And so the concentration camps and how they racialized social control, they borrowed a lot from what happened with indigenous people, First Nation people in this country, and it's replicated. And you see that, you see the shadow of that happening whenever you're incarcerated. So I remember, there's a great book that follows a high-level Nazi official while he's being tried in the World Court. And they finally asked him, why did you do that? He had sent thousands of people to their deaths. So why did you do that? And his answer, and I'm paraphrasing, was, I was just following orders. And you will hear the same exact thing when you talk to correctional officers and administrators and people who are supposed to be the smart people in the room, when they talk about the brutality and the death that happens at places like Rikers Island. It's that same kind of like laissez-faire attitude. People are dying. People are being brutalized on a daily basis. And you know what? I'm glad that there were interviews with certain administrators and, these smart people in the room, because they show their blind spots by how, and if you read this book, and you still think that Rikers Island is a viable place, you're delusional. There's something wrong with you. I'm serious. But there are people in this book, during the policy part of the book, that are still saying, well, we still got to, somehow or another, still advocating on some level for Rikers Island. And it's happening now. Right now, as they're deciding budgets and all that, they're not talking about closed Rikers anymore. They're talking, Adams is talking about expanding it, of putting more people in there. But when you look inside the black box of all the insidious nastiness and brutality that's happening, you got to wonder why, how can you even think like that? So my life's goal is to develop a language that takes for granted that prisons aren't good. Caging human beings as an answer to lack of education, poverty, addiction, or drugs, or violence is not a viable. It's never worked. It has never worked, and it's exacerbated it. And so my point is that that's where I start from. I start from the assumption that Rikers Island will never work, and that we need to find different ways of addressing the issues that bring people to Rikers Island to begin with. But, that makes sense here. But walk outside, read the newspaper, they're talking about expanding this crap again. So I'm kind of glad that some of the administrators were, interviewed, because they talk like they don't see their blind spots. And you're saying, wait, lady, you were just describing somebody like flushing their kid down a toilet bowl, a 17-year-old girl flushing a kid down, this is not in the book, but it's something I know, flushing her unborn child down a toilet bowl, and you're telling me that this is viable, that there's a way we can fix this? No, I mean, I'm telling you, if you read this book and you still think that incremental change, little change here, little change there works, you need to see a doctor. I'm serious.
Okay, so Eddie jumped the gun. He just no, it's cool. It's cool because you actually have a section in the book towards the end about closed Rikers. And it wasn't what I expected, because when I think of closed Rikers, I think of the last few years. You guys started with the 1970s, and the fact that there were people in the 1970s not only arguing for the closing of Rikers, but actually putting forth proposals to close it, taking up court cases about closing Rikers, and Ed Koch even campaigned on supporting closed Rikers, if you can believe that. Well, well, actually, he changed in a few minutes. He campaigned on it, and then he got elected. And he was like, "I said what?"
Well,
no, but
I can tell the story.
I'm going to bring y'all in to deal with that. But then we also got to deal with what do we do with this? Not only this monster, but monsters like that. Because Rikers is just a concentration of prisons in this country. It's not the outlier, the one they got wrong. It is what prisons are. So, get loose. Okay, they're going to start.
So, yeah, in 1979, there was this brief moment of light. That's how I think about it. An aide to Koch, who was just elected, as Carl said, had the idea of turning Rikers over to the state prisons and then building 4 new borough jails for the pretrial detainees. And this solved 2 problems. One, it put the pretrial detainees closer to home, which is a huge issue, and it brought the state prisoners from those prisons up on the Canadian border it's like outrageous that they're up there. I mean, the things that the families have to do to visit their loved ones up in those prisons is unbelievable. They get phone, they pay exorbitant amounts to talk to them on the phone. The transportation is horrendous, and they pay exorbitant amounts for that. Anyway, and so what happened was the same old line institutions that are currently mobilizing to stop the Close Rikers plan mobilized back then. And that's the unions, the not in my backyard folks, the people who believe that having a jail in your neighborhood is automatically going to increase the crime rate, which has never been proven to be true. And eventually, and then also there was some resistance from the state. And one of the resistance was, the structures on Rikers just weren't really built as state prisons. So, and that's what's going to happen with this Close Rikers thing, is it's going to be the devil's in the details. It's going to be kind of undermined by things like, we can't really do that because that's not quite right, or that's not the way we have it, or how can we have 4 different emergency services units to respond to riots when we can have 1 on Rikers? Everyone's centralized on Rikers. It's almost as if we've never built a functional large institution in the country. So anyway, the story of 1979 was that a couple of years later, Koch didn't even kill it himself or announce that it had been killed. He had Ben Ward, who was then his correction commissioner. Ben Ward, who later became the police commissioner, and he kind of announced it in like a few words at a city council hearing that this idea had died. It's kind of like on the side, like, oh yeah, we're not going to do that one. But fast forward to today, the difference that was in the Close Rikers movement in the last 5 years and the one that was not there in '79 were the voices of the people who had been incarcerated. They were almost completely cut out of it. Even in the big hearing, the head of legal aid gave this moving speech about the importance of doing this back in '79, but not one person who had been incarcerated testified in this hearing, which is kind of extraordinary. What you had in the Close Rikers movement was a different thing. You had people who were affected who were speaking. And then, and now with the deadline, it's supposed to close in 2027, and these 4 new jails are supposed to be built. Now we're hearing about the logistical problems. The construction of the Brooklyn Borough Jail is going to take another 2 years, and the mayor's talking about a Plan B, and the correction unions are saying, well, how are we going to, like I said earlier, how are we going to get the respond to a big riot if it happens? So we're going to see this kind of resistance continue to build, and also the not in my backyard folks. I mean, there are still people who believe, like Chinatown has a very well organized, very a group that's growing in influence about the jail that's sort of being built there. So anyway, just turn it over to Reuven.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the last point is that there's talk about a federal receiver also taking over, and that talking about like revolutionary moments in the department. I think that's kind of one that people are turning to, and they're saying, look, there's been commissioners over the years, over the decades, who've come in and have well intentions of reforming the agency, and clearly that hasn't happened. And so there's a need for kind of outside the box thinking, or how to kind of operate this totally differently. So there's been a push by the Legal Aid Society and federal monitor to kind of convince the federal monitor over the jails to support essentially would be the judge overseeing this kind of class action lawsuit that's been going on for a bunch of years to appoint a federal receiver, and the receiver could be in charge of anything from medical, which is how it works in California, to a certain population, which is how it worked in Chicago. It's unclear like what the receiver would potentially be in charge of. There hasn't been any receiver that's in this country that's been in charge of the entire facility or anything remotely the size of Rikers. But there was a hearing in December. It was a real moment in time. But there was a lot of kind of optimism from the reformers who felt that this was going to happen. And ultimately, the receiver would have incredible power. They could essentially do almost anything they felt was necessary, including drastically kind of expanding the training, which actually, Graham just reported the other day, has actually decreased from like 6 months to only 12 weeks. They could do everything from, firing officers without going to kind of a disciplinary hearing. Ultimately also, it's tough because whatever changes the receiver makes could be challenged in court, and ultimately, that's very likely that the union would challenge some of these changes. So, it wouldn't happen overnight, and it would be a long process. But the judge who's overseeing the case, felt that the city should get some more time to kind of turn things around, and so it's been kind of put on hold right now.
Okay. Well, let me say this. Anybody who really looks at the situation in Rikers, the conditions, the fact that so many of the people are there because they're too poor to meet the bail, the violence officially that they are forced to endure, the unofficial violence that is actually part of the way that the authorities control the prison, frankly. That's part of why they allow this stuff to go on, with people dividing up, fighting each other, the Bloods running this, residents, the Latin Kings running that one, et cetera, et cetera. You look at that, and you got a heart, then you would say this place needs to be closed down. But that doesn't get you to the heart of the problem, because this system needs prisons like that. They got no future for millions and millions of youth out here. None whatsoever. No jobs. No education. No ability to deal with their mental health things. All because what this system runs for is profit lining the pockets of the people who rule it. So it's not enough to say we're going to abolish this one prison, or frankly all the prisons, because the problems are holistic, I think. They're all together, and they end up to a system that's got no future for many, many people here, no future at all, and not a good future for the rest of us. And we could talk about the different reasons for that. That is why. And I say the same thing about abolishing the police. This system needs their police. They got to have them out there, and they got to have them doing what they're doing to force people to put up with this shit that they got them locked into. That's why we say we need a revolution. That is the way to solve it. Get rid of the system. That's how we'll get rid of its evil, if you want to call it that. I would call them repressive institutions. That's what we think is necessary. I'm going to give the mic over to Eddie, and then we're going to open it up. I'll just say this. People say, well, what kind of society would you put into existence to deal with that? Well, Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader that I follow, has authored a constitution for a future socialist republic in North America. And it actually breaks down how the government would function, how the economy would work, how education would go, all like that, starting from the day after the revolution and going forward to end exploitation and oppression once and for all. That's the point on that. And to those who say, well, you can't make a revolution, it's a nice idea, but it can't happen in a country like this. It can happen. There is every basis in the horrors that people are forced to endure to bring people forward to make revolution, especially right now. because even though it looks as if all the initiative is with the fascists, the Democrats are hanging in there, but they have nothing to offer people. There is actually the basis in the great division, the sharp divisions in society, the infighting, the deep splits, to break people away from the hold that the system has over us. You know, and this is something that the revolutionary leader, again, Bob Avakian, goes into in his interview, Heart and Soul and Hardcore Revolutionary. We've got cards on that. I'll make sure everybody gets one. Because he calls this a rare time when revolution becomes more possible. I can talk with you about that afterwards. I want to give the mic over to Eddie, get him in, and then get you all into this conversation. But I wanted to put that out in relation to that. Is there anything more you want to say on the question of closing?
Sure. I am an abolitionist at heart. But the way I was taught abolition isn't just about breaking things down. It's about building a society that is more equitable. It's about building a society that answers to the needs of the people who live within that society in a fair way. What we have now is that the answer to everything, to poverty, to lack of access to good education, to access to medical care, is prison. You lock them up. I wouldn't propose of letting everybody loose out of prisons like tomorrow, because that would be unfair and it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't benefit the people who are being incarcerated. What I would propose first is to develop the path dependencies that people need, so that when they get out, they're coming out to things that they need, that benefit them, that give them a better life. Just letting people loose like it's nothing, that's not right. That's immoral. But building a society that answers to the needs of the people, that's what I believe an abolitionist movement looks like. And so I just wanted to put that out there. I am an abolitionist, but I believe that abolition is about building, not just about bringing down.
Okay. Took us a while to get there, but we're now to the point where the audience comes in. I'm going to start with the brother there because I think he had the first hand up. Yeah, you in the hat with the yellow writing on it. I can't read it from. You just took it off. That's you.
Good evening, everyone. Sir, your name? I'm sorry, your name?
Me?
Yes, sir.
Carl Dix.
Carl, I respect. First of all, this is vital what you guys are doing. You didn't go to the Vietnam War, and I commend you for that. Because I was in the Marines for 6 years. I didn't go to war, but I respect that. Because even though I joined the Marines because I wanted to be something bigger. I wanted to join something bigger than myself, right? And I graduated from high school. I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to do something. And the Marines, wow, I'm joining something that's part of this country. But from a young age, I always knew that I was always against the war. Me going to kill someone that never really did anything personal to me. So I commend you on that. I did 6 years in the Marines. I'm proud. I don't judge. And I commend you, sir, for what you did. Okay? Nobody could take anything away from you. And I apologize that you did time for something that you believed in. That gentleman, you spot on with everything you said. So I'm going to go on this side of the coin. I was a correction officer at Rikers Island. Okay? All right? And let me give you a little bit of insight. I went into corrections in 81. I resigned in 88. I was traumatized, even being a correction officer. The academy is like 9 weeks. In 9 weeks, you don't have you're dealing with human beings. See, I never caught no one an inmate. And next con. Because to get respect, you have to give respect. Right? So, with 9 weeks at the academy, going into it's like a war zone. You know, you got these older correctional officers that weren't trained right. Some of them have psychological. You talking about a mental issue? Some of these officers I'm working with, I didn't know how they were hired. But now these veteran correction officers will teach guys like me, right? And like you said, I was following orders. Guess what? I really don't care if you believe this, what I'm going to tell you tonight. I did not follow orders, okay? Because of my upbringing, right? Because of that, even when I resigned in '88, and I some inmates ran into me. My name is Baez, and it was 2 officers. You know how many inmates we deal with every day? And for an inmate to remember my name after I resigned and see me in the street and thank me because I was able to get a social worker to help them with their marriage, and they see me in the street. And when they will come up to me, I'll go, oh my God. They remember I was correctional. They came, they shook my hand. They told me, thank you for what you did. There are a lot of rotten apples. But there are some good ones. And you know what? I pat myself in the back because I'm one of the good ones. I resigned in '88. I resigned in 1988. I just had to leave. It was too much. Let me tell you something about some correction officers. A lot of correction officers that were just in the same boat that I was. Some of them were trying to raise a family, right? To raise a family like everyone else, right? Raise a family, pay your bills, this and that. And you know what? A lot of them committed suicide. A lot of corrections committed suicide. That gentleman, he's absolutely correct. The system is, but I was on the other side, and I could talk about the other side. I can't say I wasn't incarcerated. But you know what? I was incarcerated. Psychologically, I was incarcerated because I was working 17 hours a day, forced overtime. I didn't have the right training. You know, I didn't have the right training. I didn't know. All I knew is I wanted to go in, I wanted to come out. And guess what? My family was suffering too. You know why? Because when I went home, I took all that with me. Right? So it's a double standard. You know? And he's right. Listen. Can I call you my brother? My brother, I apologize for society for treating you the way they treated you. I apologize for that. But I was on the other side. And they see me as authority. And excuse me. Sorry. People that were incarcerated, is that okay? Because I got a lot of respect for them. I don't want to disrespect them. People that were incarcerated, they do not like authority. They don't care how good you are. You are authority. You're wearing a uniform. You're the enemy. You know what? Some of us that became correctional officers, we didn't know that somebody's going to tell us, well, guess what? You got to treat them like that. You can't give them that. You can't tell them to get on the phone. Right? And guess what? Listen. Can I use this word? It's like being in the mafia. Either you're with them or you're not with them. So guess what? Sometimes I used to go eat. And you know what? I wouldn't sit down with these correctional officers. You know why? Because I knew who was who. I knew the guys that abused. And you know what he's talking about? And I don't really care what I'm saying. I'm only speaking the truth.
Okay, brother. Could I ask that you, we want to get some other people in too.
I'm sorry, I can't really. All right.
I felt that that's what you was
Yeah.
getting wound up. Okay. No, I really want to move on to somebody else, Shirley.
Listen, I'm just speaking from the heart.
I know you're speaking from the heart.
I live that.
I heard everything you said.
Yeah.
We need to move on.
Okay. How you doing? How you doing? How you
All
doing?
right.
Okay, it's your brother Al. Okay, I did some time in Clinton, Attica, Auburn, Green Haven, Sing Sing, right? But the worst jail that I was in was Clinton Del Mar, Clinton, because the correctional officers, they're rednecks and they do not play. Yep, but that's what jail I've been in, what jail, Clinton. And I turned my life over to God. I turned my life over. And I've been home 20 years. Yeah, I turned my life over. I turned my life over. But I sit at Rikers Island. That's a worst place to be because all they got are gangs in now, gangs, and they be cutting, slicing people up, But I survived, But I turned my life over to God, and yep, and I ain't go back since. And this one, when I was in Clinton, this one still said, okay, I got 62, 10 to 20. I did 10 to 20. I did 15 years, 15. And in Clinton, it still said, hey, nigga, you will be back. And guess what? I never went back. All right. Never went back. All right.
It's one of the things we were told repeatedly in our interviews was that people would say, "Don't look back when you're in the bus leaving Rikers and going over the bridge. Don't look back or else you'll come back." And so it's like a superstition.
Yeah. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Wade, and I like to joke with people a lot of times that I have a BA from Baruch in economics. I have an MS in education from Mercy College, and I have a PhD in psychology from Rikers Island. So, in line with what you're saying about the same architects who build the prisons build the projects, I spent 6 years living in Webster Projects. I'm an immigrant. When we first came to the country, we lived in tenements, then we moved to the projects. And upon my incarceration, I had to get acclimated because I was a free individual and I didn't understand why I was, falsely arrested in the first place. But then I communicated, and that was my talent, and I learned to navigate the system. At the law library, those guys are brilliant lawyers, incredible lawyers, and locked up in Rikers. But I just want to sound a warning for society in general and people in particular. There are some young men who are choosing to go to Rikers because they understand that's where the power lies. And if you go to some of these bodegas and you look around, some of those guys look like hostages because these gangs are getting smarter because they know who run Rikers, and they have no problem going because they don't feel like they're in danger. And they're coming out and they're organizing, and they're not afraid. They're not afraid of going back. But I've met these young men inside and outside. And I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a really weird summer. But good luck to you all.
That was ominous.
Okay.
No, thanks, everyone. I mean, I think we've alluded to it a little bit earlier, but just to ask a question about the school-to-prison pipeline, I think it'd be great if anyone feels comfortable elaborating as to how Rikers fits part and parcel within that kind of school-to-prison pipeline operation that we see here in the United States. Thank you.
So, one of the things I was doing for a while was I had a leadership development workshop for people who were coming back to the community. And one of the things we did, we were being invited by educators to go into school and talk about our experiences to take away the glamour. Because, what happens is that incarceration becomes so embedded within the community that for some people, going to prison is a badge of honor, right? And so we wanted to go inside schools and, break that down, because going to prison was like the opposite of being a man, the opposite of being a human being. And so one of the things that you find, I would go to these schools where the latest technology at that school was the metal detector at the front door. You understand? There were no computers, no laptops, no tablets. The books in the library, I would say, take me to the library. They have books on careers that were from the 1950s, where the girls were saying you become nurses, and the guys became what they considered masculine careers. And so what you find is that the architecture within the schools really do look like the architecture inside prisons. So prisons aren't just a physical manifestation. It is a state of being, right? So like when they had stop and frisk, even the difference between projects and the prisons that I've been to was the amount of movement that you were allowed. But you're not allowed that much movement if you're in the projects, because when they had stop and frisk at full blast, people were getting stopped 6-7 times a day if you stepped outside of the projects. So this message of like being incarcerated, of being caged, this is being taught at a very early age. They have ways of like, kids are being indoctrinated and being caged at a very early age. And that's the whole school to prison pipeline. That's that whole thing. Because you're not going to school to learn. You're not, people aren't learning in the schools. You're going to school to learn how to obey. And if you look at the history of education and look at textbooks in New York City in the early 1900s, the sentence that you were taught to write so you could learn how to write was, I will be on work on time. I will obey the teacher. I will obey the police officer. I'm not making this up. If you look at the history, it's about obeying. It's about not questioning. And education should be about learning what questions to ask.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on this also, just the cost alone. I think it's about, on average, the latest comptrollers report indicated, I think it was about close to $600,000 it cost the city to pay for one person behind bars for a year. And, when you talk about the budgets being kind of an indicator of what's the priority in the city of the mayor, and, it's not something that's drastically changing, right? There's a budget that's coming up. And this is just kind of a continuation, and I mean he has actually extended. There's a youth program, summer youth program. Sorry, but I mean there really isn't a lot of change in the TOC budget. Sorry, allergies.
Okay, I'll see if there are some other people who haven't spoken yet. I do want to add something to this school to prison pipeline, because it is really a systemic thing. And it relates to that there is nothing out there for these youth. Where are the factories where you used to be able to get a job that could allow you to raise a family? Where are those things? They're not there. So the school is preparing you for something different. And they even break down in the school, starting around the 4th grade, who's going to be tracked to go where. And many of our kids, by the 4th grade, are being prepared to fail. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to become anything worthwhile. And that is setting you up. And there is the thing that, with the advent of mass incarceration, which had a lot to do with the crack epidemic. No, there was a real jump in incarceration. I'm really talking about I studied how this went. And note that crack came from making cocaine much cheaper to produce as a drug, so that it then became accessible to people who were poor. Because cocaine was a high-end drug. But then it got broken down, and newspapers ran the recipe for how to make crack. Think about that. They ran the recipe for how to make crack. But then you got all these people going into prison, and there was a real leap starting in the 80s and 90s. So it became something that people did, and no longer the thing that had a lot of stigma. Because when I came up, it wasn't that nobody went to prison, but that wasn't something that you were trying to do. But then it got to the point where, generation or so after me, people kind of had the expectation that if they hadn't gotten on that track that was going to get them to higher education and somewhere else, then that's where they were going to end up. You know, so this pipeline thing, it isn't that people were not trying to achieve. It's not the fault of our young people that this became the thing. This is how the system was set up, to steer large numbers of people that there was nothing else they could do anything with. And that's what we're up against. And again, it becomes a society-wide thing. There isn't like this quick fix of, so let's make this law or let's enact this policy. We need a whole damn different system, and that's why I'm a revolutionary. Now, let me see. Who else wants to speak up? I got the brother there who wants to come back in again. Let me take, and then I'll come up to the front. The woman more in the middle, and I'll come up to the front.
Thank you. I want to thank all four of you guys for coming, and this has been so informational for me. My question is for Eddie. How did you reacclimate to society when it comes to housing needs, food security? Were there any services provided for you? Maybe mental health services, care management, anything like that?
Good question. I was very fortunate. I had an aunt who was like a grandmother to me, like a surrogate mother, who lived in the projects, who let me live with her when I first came out. I don't know what would have happened to me if it wouldn't have been for her. Also, while I was incarcerated, and I won't get too heavily into that, it's a long story, I started a life of recovery. So my major problem was I sold drugs, and I was my own best customer, right? And so I knew I need, when I was going to court and someone mentioned the law library, I got they wanted to give me 17 years. And I said, well, what did I do? Like, kidnap the president? Like 17 years, I'm a drug addict. And I had a gentleman in the law library who helped me get rid of one of my felonies, which brought down the sentencing guidelines. So I ended up doing 2.5 to 5 instead of like the 17 that they were offering me. And I was fighting throughout my whole court case. I wanted to be sent to a drug rehab because I knew I needed help. I knew I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to live on my own. So I needed to find a new way with new principles to live a life that didn't involve drugs. And I knew I needed drug rehab. But the court at that time wasn't listening. And they were like, nah, you're going to do time. It's just a matter of how much time you're going to do. But while I was incarcerated, I was lucky. There was one counselor who was named Angel, who was in recovery, who helped me go through, that 12. I'm a 12-stepper, so I got clean through the Narcotics Anonymous program. And so he helped me do the steps. And then when I ended up going up north to my state prison, there was another counselor who was also in recovery that helped me. So I celebrated my first year clean while I was incarcerated. So when I got clean, that changed the whole the whole thing. That changed my whole life around. So when I came out, the first thing I did, and this is very scary, this is how insidious it can be. I was walking around, it's a beautiful day like today. I was walking around, I had no intention of doing anything wrong, and then I stopped because I realized without me knowing, I had walked to the last place where I had gotten arrested at. And what scared me wasn't that I went there, but that I didn't know that I was going there. And that's when I knew I needed help. And so I called someone who then called another person, came and picked me up in a car and took me to a meeting. And so I surrounded myself with people who were trying to do the same thing I was trying to do, was to stay clean one day at a time. And I don't mean to sound evangelical about it. The 12 steps aren't for everybody. So having the roof over my head and then having some guiding principles that were different than what I had before I went to prison and staying clean was what helped me stay outside. And then finally, along with my getting clean, I was becoming more and more politically aware. I was becoming more awake. And I know woke is not a good expression these days, but fuck that shit. I woke. I awoke. I woke up. And I wanted to do something good for my community. And so I surrounded myself with other people who were also trying to, agitate for change within the community. And those, three things, those three pillars were the things that helped me stay out and to change and to grow as a human being.
Okay.
This is difficult for me. I live in the community over here, but I'm from Cross on 10th Street. But I'm originally from Albany, New York. Okay? So you go up there and you do a crime, you ain't coming back down to New York. You're staying up there. Okay, so now this goes back to I was 8 years old or 7. I saw the police storming our house with my brother. This is difficult. He just died yesterday. He was 75 years old, my oldest brother. He had terminal cancer. But he was a bricklayer when he got to be a older man. Because he was young himself. I was 8 and I'm 72. So we wasn't that far apart. But I still didn't understand the police coming in our house with 13 kids and all that. But they said that he did something and they took him out. And to today, I've never heard the story out of my brother's mouth or my family mouth saying that he was in jail and what he was in jail for and why they took him out of the house. And that bothered me. And I always was afraid to ask him to make him relive that. Okay? So now, the other thing is that Rikers. If they don't get rid of the projects in any of these cities that have the projects, Rikers ain't going no damn where. That's the way I feel. And the other thing is that I work with Eddie Ellis. He was in jail when he had throat cancer. And his brother was Bruce Ellis, and I worked with Bruce Ellis. And when Eddie came home, that's when I met Eddie to come work with us. And I know about that in the family. And I met their mother, and I went to the mother's funeral. So I go a long way back and around. I worked for the health department for many years, too. But down to the school thing, I worked in the Board of Ed. Yes, they got a serious situation with black males, Puerto Rican males, or children of color. And just, 2 days ago, the man shot the boy. Yeah. How the hell you going to be scared of somebody black? A child at that. Yes, they do some dangerous things, but they've been taught and seen and been in that setting to do things. But he wasn't out there to do nothing. But you didn't shoot at him, you shot him. And I believe he's laying in the hospital on critical now. Okay? So this cycle is crazy and everything. And I feel for a lot of things that's going on. But when I was in the school, I used to see the teachers poke the kids, the boys, And they wasn't do-ragging. They wasn't wearing braids. They wasn't nasty and dirty. They was just poking them and saying, oh, he's not going to be nothing. Get on up there. Shut up. Don't look at me like that. And I just look at them. And these are mostly the women teachers. The men teachers was, like, you're little and I'm bigger than you. Bully like that. Or the look. And you know, they look at me, what you looking at? Irish little black girl with freckles. So, you know, it didn't bother me. I just look and look and look. But I remembered today I'm 70-something. And I have a son that's 33, okay? I have a daughter that's 44. My son got a bachelor's degree, Full Sail University in Florida. And he works at NYU Hospital. He has a little business. He's working with Wall Street. He intertwined a lot with his little white friends. Then turn around, my daughter, she got her master's degree not too long ago. She's working for the Attorney General in the Bronx. Thank God it's not in Manhattan with Trump and, what's her name, Bragg. Because Alvin Bragg is a member of my church, Abyssinia. Okay? But I didn't want him running around here threatening my family, shoot my family down because, you know, she worked with the attorney. You know, I said, Lord have mercy, I'm so glad you work in the Bronx and not in Manhattan because it's some real stinky stuff going on. Yes, I want Trump in jail for a lot of reasons. Okay? He dehumanized women in a lot of ways. Okay. The other thing, now let me see. The 110th Street area, you know about Cross 110th Street. You know about the Central Park joggers. Not really joggers. Central Park, Exonerated 5. I know them. I lived up the street on 111th Street. Okay? Junkie paradise. Cocaine paradise. I looked out the window and watched. I never used drugs, drink, and alcohol. And I don't even mess with sugar. I don't eat pork. I don't eat beef. I don't drink alcohol. I don't do none of that. Okay? But I'm capable of doing some of those things. You know, I let a little wine every now and then. I used to drink Southern Comfort, Bacardi, but that was when I was really young. Okay? But what I'm saying is that when you live on 111th Street, remember when they had that big shooting one Thanksgiving, they killed everybody in the house? In 111th Street on Thanksgiving Day? Yes. What you call the people? Not the Colombians. The mafia in them was intertwined with that. They went across stream 128 and shot up everybody. The lady was holding her Thanksgiving drink in her hand. Shot her and she gripped it and they found her like that. Days later they found her like that. All the people got killed. I lived right across the street from here on the second floor, and that was like on the first floor in the basement in 128 West 111th Street. I lived in building 127. My grandmother catching me looking out the window watching them drug addicts act up. She come in there, flip the blind, hit the books, the doll babies or something, but not this window. But I used to watch that, and she didn't know I learned that they was doing things that I saw blood. I said, I can never do that. Some of my friends did it. Some of my mother's friends did, my grandmother's friends. But what happens is that when you see it, that kind of, you live that environment, sometimes you do come out like that. But you don't always go to school and come out like that, and you don't always stay at home and come out like that. But I got 2 or 3 friends that's living my age or a little older. 2 or 3, because the whole 111th Street, from 8th Avenue all the way to Lenox, drug addicts. You know what was going on with cocaine. You know what's going on with the needle. So, you know, it's I don't know what to say. You know, I don't know how we're going to be saved. You know, yeah, we praying people. We pray, but that is not always a solution. I mean, don't give it up, but it's not the solution. You got to open your eyes and do for yourself. I look at my son, I said, don't even put it in your thought, because I already know what your brain is thinking about. My daughter, I said, get it together. I said, oh, yeah, by the way, you had a baby at 17. I'm going to help you. But guess what? You're going to get that degree before I die. Congressman just died. John Lewis gave her her bachelor's degree. He said, I hope I'll be here for your master's. I said, I will if you don't, because he had pancreatic cancer. So I made sure they got theirs and he got his. No kid, no wife, him. She got a daughter, 17. But I made sure, you know. But you got to teach your kids in something positive and make them active and get them in things and whatnot. And, hey, beg for money. Everybody else got extra. Beg for it.
Okay. All right. I hear you. I hear what you're saying. But here's what I would say in response to that.
Do that.
We got to go beyond seeing to it that our family does okay, because this is bigger than us, and we have to see that and go to work on it. That's why Revolution Books is here.
But
That's why I'm here.
Here, but a lot of people that's right down the street when I was walking here, the man was laying on the street, crawling on the street. When I left, when I came back, he said, I want to shoot by the bus stop, by 135th, by Adam Clayton House building. And he's still doing that. Now this K2 stuff, they roll around in the street into the cars. Who is manufacturing this kind of drug to put out here for these people to get? These people that's doing that, they don't have no money. They don't have any money. And they're young. And I'm looking at them. How high could you be that you can crawl on the ground and out on the street where the cars is rolling? And I've got to stop and pull out my cell phone and call an ambulance for you or police for you. Who is doing, what lab is bringing this kind of drug into the inner city areas? And it ain't only just black kids.
No, it isn't. It is.
Some white kids.
It is in fact an international thing.
Yeah, but
and
what's this K2 stuff? I don't know.
Okay, I can't tell you what K2 is. What I can tell you is we need to get rid of a system that functions in such a way that it has one level of things for the people at the top, and then a whole other level which includes mass intoxication, either physically through the form of drugs, alcohol, and all like that, as well as things that intoxicate people mentally. We actually need a totally different system, and we do have to have principles for that. Yeah. And I would bring to people's attention the 6 points of attention of the Revolution Club, which talks about the way people should live, the kind of world we should bring into being, and how people should represent today as part of working to bring that into being. I really want to move on, though, Barbara.
Okay, one more thing. I went to Alice Crofton Convention Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Okay, Magic Johnson was there. Okay. Vice President Kamala Harris was there. She said, everybody hear this. Don't take the hokey dokey stuff on that birth control stuff. They need to mind their business and step off of what women want to do. Men need birth control pills or vasectomy.
Okay. All right. Did somebody down front, Jane?
I just wanted to speak a little further on one thing Carl said. Look, if you're a caring person, you're going to try to, take care of your family. But here's the thing. Nuclear war is not going to respect everybody just staying in their little corner, taking care of their families. The genocide that the fascists have in their sights for black people, for immigrants, is not going to respect when we stay in our little corners it's kind of like you're drowning and you're pulling on a lifeline to try to stay above water. That's what's happening, and that's why I really think everybody should think about, what Carl just posed, that we are facing a moment, and maybe I'll just end with this analogy. During the time of slavery, you got the slave masters fighting, competing for slaves. They go to the auction block and they buy people, If you see them fighting with each other, isn't that a moment to try to end slavery and not just work towards, yourself getting a better deal with a different slave master? Those are the stakes right now with the fascists, with the Democrats who are trying to respect the laws that held this country together when the fascists are preparing a genocide. That's what's happening right now. So and then if you think about a lot of what Eddie said, and I haven't read the book yet, but I'm sure there's a respectable, not respectable, but a respectful, telling of the lives of people who, are holding on to some humanity in prison, when they get out of prison. Imagine if that was harnessed in a whole different society. So, Barbara, that's my challenge, let's get into this more. Not tonight, we're going to probably end soon. You know where we are. We're here all the time. You come by. Let's let's go more deeply into this, and that's an invitation for everybody here to find out more about the revolution that Carl was talking about. We cannot live another day and accept the future that this system has for us, no matter how much we care about our families. Yeah.
Okay. I did tell you... Well, wait a minute now. Huh? The sister behind you wants to get in.
Okay, Sister Shirley, SISTA, from the Forgotten Borough, Staten Island. The most racist borough out of all the 5 boroughs, okay? It is Chumpsville. There you go. So anyway, I wanted to address the idea of you saying that it goes from school to prison. Well, I'd like to inform you all that it doesn't start in the school. It's from the cradle to the grave, okay? And even when it comes to being in the projects and what have you, right? I like to dispel that everything about the projects is negative. I grew up in the projects, okay? I raised my kids in the projects. I got married in the projects. I got divorced in the projects, okay? But the bottom line is, I went and I got my degree. Yes, I did. But that's not for everybody. And I'm letting you know, I'm telling you, whether you like to hear it or not, just because you have a degree, that don't mean shit. Because a bum in the street has deserves just as much respect as a person who have a degree. My degree was in teaching. And I could not get a job on Staten Island because I was the wrong flavor. Okay? So I went to Brooklyn and I taught. But the bottom line is, I am a Christian. Okay? Bottom line. But, let me tell you, this revolution is just as important. Just as, if not more. Because we need to come together and realize that the system that exists, it doesn't matter what or who you are, it's getting worse. And we have to work together. It doesn't make any difference if you are, what do you call it, a Muslim, if you are a German, if you're vanilla, if you're black, if you're Latino, whatever the case may be. We need to have this revolution, but the most important part of it is we need to practice what we preach, okay? We have to show that this revolution is better and what we deserve. We don't need to be preached at, but we need to be shown by example. Okay, peace.
All right. Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to say this real quick. I don't want to take too much time. Okay, I'm just speaking from experience. As the gentleman said about the code, the language, the way you treat it, the way you have to. Okay, I was working in a dormitory area. There's just beds. It's about 100 beds, and I was working there for about 2 weeks. And I really don't know the percentages of how many the numbers as far as how many blacks are incarcerated, how many Hispanics, Asians, and whites. Very little, 10%, very little. I was working in an area, dormitory area, right? And you had these incarcerated gentlemen that clean the area. They get paid, forget it, I don't even want to say. And they were coming up to me all the time telling me, listen, we have an incarcerated gentleman that's not taking a shower, right? And I was like, okay, what do you want me to do? Listen, if you don't take a shower because he smells so bad, we're going to beat him up and throw him in the showers, right? So I was like, what? So they kept, then the next day I went, because I had my life, I had to run home, I got a dog, I got a family, right? Not really thinking about, but you have to really get involved, even if you are a correctional officer. The next day I went, they said, listen, Mr. Byers, Officer Byers, we're tired, we're going to take this this young, white, incarcerated man and throw him in the showers. So I said, wait a minute, before anything happens, anything drastic happens, let me bring him into the office. So when I brought him in, I told him, listen, and he smelled real bad. And I was like, listen, man, they're going to beat you down. I'm not here 24 hours. They're going to beat you down and throw you in the showers. You know, what is going on? He told me, no, I'm white. I'm young. I figured if I smell, they won't try to rape me. So now I was like, you know, everybody was looking at him like he was crazy, but he made more sense than anybody I knew there. I was like, okay. I was like, all right. So he wants to smell, because in his mind they told him, if you go to jail, you're going to get raped, and if you smell, nobody gets next to you, which made a lot of sense. So I had to bring all the workers and explain to them what was going on. And, you know, and I just felt good that nothing drastic happened. And that goes to show you, sometimes, like he said, you go to jail, but the things that are embedded in people's head don't really happen. You know? So anyway, I wanted to share that with you, okay? All right.
Okay. Look.
Go, Carl, before you.
Okay.
Yeah, just 2 minutes.
You're my lawyer, go ahead.
First of all, Eddie Ellis gets around, I'll tell you. I worked with Eddie at the holistic law firm called Neighborhood Defender Service. I worked with him. He worked there. So I had a chance to work with him for about 5 years before he passed away. And also, I bought the book. I haven't read it yet. Did you speak to any prosecutors in New York City? Are they quoted in the book at all?
There's a section which looks at what the landscape in the courts was like in the 90s during the
No, the reason
I'm sorry,
I ask,
do you want to
yeah, no.
say
Well,
something?
the reason I ask is because they do have mental health courts. They have veteran court. Then, I mean, they try to have a drug court as well. But the prosecutors are so involved, and when they look at an addict or someone with a mental health issue, what they see, people of color, they don't give them a second chance or a third chance. If they mess up, you're out. Okay, especially in the alternative to incarceration system. And they've got to remove the prosecutors from this situation so that they're not looking at people as criminals. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, we were not slaves. We were enslaved people. Okay? Language is important.
Okay, I can't hear you.
Introduce Kenny.
Oh, I was going to let him introduce himself. Kenny Gilbert. And when I said he's my lawyer, I was speaking more in the holistic sense of Revolution Books' lawyer.
Kenneth Gilbert,
he's an attorney.
I'm an attorney.
Up here in Harlem.
But I like to work with people that are looking for change, and also people that believe that people should be treated, everyone should be treated with respect. And I think that Carl is one of those people that treats everyone with respect as well.
You know, you brought up I just want to talk a little bit about something that's a little bit positive. Conversation has been, you know, in the 90s there was a massive wave of arrests where the Rikers population went up to above 22,000, as Eddie mentioned, and today it's under 6,000. So what happened in between? Well, what happened was, as we go into in the book, was that people realized that sending folks to Rikers for 3 weeks or 6 months with bails of $2,500 to $5,000 was completely pointless. It was pointless in terms of rehabilitation. It was pointless in terms of punishment, and there was nothing positive happening. So there's a generation of people who were in the criminal justice system who were fairly young at this point, who kind of who came through the system and became more aware of how pointless this exercise of constantly arresting people over and over again and cycling through the system. We interviewed somebody in the book who was arrested 70 times on low-level drug cases. And I mean, what's the point of that? With no, he was just being cycled through. There was no direction. There was no treatment. There was no. So one of the reasons the population began to decline is because some people inside the criminal justice system realized that this is pointless, and they became more active, and so you start seeing the chipping away of this population, not as many low-level arrests being sent to Rikers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way that there is some hopeful element to that. 6,000 in a city of 8.59 million. We can argue about whether that's too many or too few, but I think at least there is some glimmer of hope that like things can improve. That there's an actual numerical representation of that ideas can change, attitudes can change, and things can start to improve. That's all.
Excuse me, I just want to add something. I just want to say, because there were gentlemen that were incarcerated that were on free trial for years on low-level offenses.
Well, that still exists. Look, obviously there are people who have been on Rikers right now for 3 years, for 4 years. There's one guy actually who Reuven wrote about who's been there for 8 years, right? Which is at pre-trial. These are people. It's a highly complicated case, but the point is that people are incarcerated pre-trial in New York City longer than just about any place else in the country on average today. So I'm not talking about it's a nuanced thing. I'm not talking about everything's great. No, there's a lot of stuff that's absolutely, completely fucked up. But I was just talking about that there is some, the population being below 6,000 is kind of an accomplishment if you think about it. That's all.
Okay, I want to move to close down the formal part of this. We have been going for a while. Okay, ask a question.
We've got. I've been up since 6 in the morning.
Wait, Mike. Looking at. I'm not good with this. I want to know if you all on the panel or here and everything, how are you gonna find a way to inform police officers? I went to the academy, so I got my certificate with Braxton. Okay, but I don't understand why the police. They shoot so many bullets. They don't shoot 22 bullets, 15 bullets, 10 bullets to an elephant. And they do it to these young people. Mm-hmm. Or they do it to some people. And everybody's not mentally ill that they do it to. And all those police officers are not mentally ill neither. But they are damn scared.
They are trained to do that.
Okay.
I can stop this right here. They train them to do that.
To shoot them like they animals.
That's what you are trained to kill somebody if you start shooting. If you shoot once, you're supposed to shoot a whole lot of times. And they also recruit people who are open to doing that. And look, it used to be that black people couldn't become police officers because they couldn't pass the psych test.
Oh, really?
Think about that.
Okay.
But think about the killers who passed it.
Okay.
So but I really want to take us to end of the formal program, because this is a program about Rikers.
Okay.
And
but
we can talk about that.
They part of Rikers.
We can talk about that after.
Okay. Let's do one more thing.
I wanted to bring up on this question of people who have spent a lot of time in Rikers pre-trial. Khalif Browder.
Okay, like I said, my son took the test when George Floyd got killed. He took the test to be a police officer. He was in his, late 20s. Wasn't quite 30. And 32nd Precinct wanted him because they knew what kind of son I had. And he wanted to do it. I said, go take the test. He took the test. He passed it. He took the physical. He passed it. Okay, you going to Albany? That's where I'm from. There's a lot of family up there. Go up there for training. But you know what my son said?
Okay.
This is it. Nobody said?
We really
I
have
don't want to do that. I don't want to be a cop.
I'm sorry.
That's good.
We have to end this program on Rikers, and we can talk about that.
Okay.
But we have to end this program on Rikers. I want to thank the office for coming out
Yes.
and for staying much later than they wanted to.